Welcome back to Redefining AI, the tech podcast. On behalf of Squirro, the enterprise Gen AI platform, I'm your host, Lauren Hawker-Zaffer. Now, in this episode, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Imanol Schlag, a prominent researcher in the field of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Currently serving as a postdoctoral researcher at the ETH Zurich, Dr. Schlag has made significant contributions to the development of advanced neural network architectures and reasoning models. His academic journey includes a PhD under the guidance of renowned AI pioneer Jürgen Schmidhuber at the Swiss AI Lab, where he explored innovative approaches to enhance machine learning capabilities. Now, Dr. Schlag's research focused on the intersection of language models and quantitative reasoning, with several of his papers gaining recognition in top-tier conferences. He's known for his work on linear transformers and their applications in fast-weight programming, which has generated substantial attention in the AI community. Now, I'd like you to join us as we dive into Dr. Schlag's insight on the future of AI, the challenges of developing trustworthy models, and his vision for the role of machine learning in society. Now, whether you're an AI enthusiast or just curious about the latest advancements in technology, this conversation really does promise to be both enlightening and inspiring. So I'd like to welcome you to Redefining AI with us.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for having me.
So I've introduced you with a sort of comulgated biography that I've taken from various different places. I think that your introduction warrants a personal one, so maybe you can expand on how I've introduced you and share a little bit more with our audience of who you are and what you stand for at the moment.
Oh, well, those can be big questions, I guess. I'll try to keep it short. Well, what you described before, these fast-weight programmers that work on linear transformers or scalable RNNs, these are very technical things that I dealt with during my PhD that I still dabble in. But since I finished my PhD, I began a postdoc at ETH, and after just a few months moved into more of a research scientist position at the ETH AI Center, where I'm co-leading the LLM, the large language model effort of the Swiss initiative. And here it's really about developing trustworthy and transparent large language models for the benefit of society, with a particular focus here of the Swiss society.
Interesting. So let's take a step back, because I would like to talk about your efforts at the AI Center a little bit later in the conversation. But what would interest me is, where did you start your own journey into the field of artificial intelligence? Like, what sparked your own curiosity?
Oh, well, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a detective, really. There was a need to figure out things and how they work. And after doing an apprenticeship in computer science, since computers were the thing I wanted to figure out for initially, I did my military service, which by the way was a great experience, and here in Switzerland. And then afterwards decided that, all right, this is now the time to study computer science in a bit more detail. So I went to the Applied University of Northwestern Switzerland, where I really learned a lot about software engineering. And it was really only towards the end of this degree that I realized that, well, software engineering is cool, you can build things, but there are these algorithms that are doing very exciting or interesting things, magical sometimes almost. I would like to learn more about those and get a bit of a deeper knowledge. And that's why I went to Scotland, St. Andrews in particular, to study artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is often like this umbrella term for all of these algorithms, which are a bit more sophisticated. And so that's then where I got to dabble a bit in these different areas. And there's one particular area which was about neural networks, which was really just touched upon. Like, it was really just a very superficial introduction to it, just a small part of one class that dealt with neural networks at this point, because they weren't as popular as they are now. And I was really fascinated by them and made them the central point of my thesis, of master thesis. And this was a fun project where we sort of tried to identify the emperor on old Roman coins. Funny enough, I have no clue about Roman emperors, but I was able to use machine learning to classify if is this Roman emperor or some other. And I was able to find a professor who was so excited about it while being interested in statistics to host that master thesis. And so I was really able to have a great project. And that's when I realized that I want to really understand that more deeply. And that's when I started to do my PhD. And in my PhD, I had a lot of opportunity and freedom, thanks to my supervisor, to really explore these topics to the deepest technical levels.
So now if you look at, you mentioned that when you were studying at St Andrews, neural networks weren't as popular and the proportion of the curriculum that covered it was probably not as extensive as it is nowadays anyways. When was that? Around when did you look at that particular component?
That should be about 2016, 2015, actually. I think 2016. I started my PhD, so 2015, 2014, somewhere there.
Okay. So, I mean, now we find ourselves at the end of 2024, almost going into 2025. A lot has happened in the AI space, looking at where you are now in terms of your responsibilities, your role, your engagement. You're looking at the components of building trustworthy, transparent LLMs in particular. What, in your own opinion, has been some of the most exciting developments in that particular timeframe, 2016 to now?
Well, it's been a wild ride, really, and it just keeps on giving. And many people don't understand that we are on this exponential trajectory where compute really doubles every fixed amount of time. And it's kind of hard to really grapple like how much more we are capable with, how much more compute capability we have now compared to just like a few years ago. And this is the main driver of a lot of machine learning innovation, in addition to the large amount of data that's been available. So at the beginning, it was really sort of the deep learning, these deep neural networks being trained for very specific problems. And so predictive AI or supervised learning, where we train small models on very specific tasks like image classification, where we could now suddenly see that if we train models on high quality data, then like we can surpass any sort of hand classifier. It was a huge shift in the AI, or let's say computer science community, really, towards deep learning models. And that was already very impactful to witness. I just started like when this was happening, right in the middle of it. But then 2019, 2020, we had a second sort of large shift, which was the fact that you can take neural networks for predictive AI models, but you can also train generative AI models. And generative AI models, they're a bit more tricky. They're about learning the distribution of the data. And so they're not necessarily useful immediately, but as a byproduct of learning the distribution of data, they learn a lot about the data itself. And that means that if you can train predict generative models that are really powerful enough, then what you can do is you can sort of extract these predictive capabilities. You can take something like ChatGPT and use it as a poem generator, for example, which is coming out of the blue, basically. No one programmed that in. And this is very exciting because it opens up a lot of opportunity to use these technologies for a greater good or to produce value.
And that obviously links quite heavily. And again, like I'm not super technical, but I do have some sort of technical understanding, and obviously the many conversations and working in a software organization. I mean, what you focused on in your research was linear transformers, and they're obviously a variant of traditional transformer models, which were heavily tied to the development of generative AI. Is there a coincidence in your linkage to obviously the excitement that you've shown about having so much computational power that's had an effect on the generative AI development? Was there a coincidental intersection with your research there? And obviously what's happening now?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, really. So the work that I've been building upon was based on this work called fast weight programmers, or fast weight neural networks. Those are neural networks that don't just have the weights, but they are usually made up of like two parts. One neural network that has regular weights that then generates weights for another neural network. And this introduces a lot of dynamic and a lot of plasticity. And what we sort of missed at this point is a bit this need for parallelization. And that's really what the transformer architecture brought. And that's a T in GPT. It's the main advantage of it. It loses certain theoretical capabilities, but it gains the ability to parallelize, which means that it is now good to throw money at it, because now if you just buy more GPUs, more computers, you can now train much larger models. Whereas with other methods like recurrent neural networks, this wouldn't be as straightforward. And so what we noticed when the transformer paper came out is that there exists a theoretical variation of it, which is a linear transformer. And this we then connected with this previous work that I was actually engaging with, this fast weight programmers work, which is basically a linear transformer. It's highly similar. And so we connected this, and this has now been the foundation, or has contributed to the foundation of a line of work which are sometimes called state space models or scalable RNNs. Those are neural network architectures that have better scale. They need basically less memory to do the same things as the regular transformer. And it looks like we are now on the brink of them being a replacement for the transformer model, because they have now seemingly matched the performance of the regular transformers that are being used.
Okay, so who's using these scalable neural network architectures?
Well, at the moment, there is just a handful of large models, or even less than a handful of large language models, let's say above 6 billion parameters, that are trained with these architectures. It's there are still like implementational efficiency differences that sometimes means it's favorable to use something like a self-attention mechanism, because they're actually very similar to a transformer architecture. It's just the layer that does the temporal mixing through time. Instead of that having a quadratic dependency on the context that it has, that you include in your prompt, it has a linear dependency. And that's the only component really that is different. Everything else is the same. And so there have been many research labs playing around with these, and there's been a few research labs that have scaled them up to a large extent, and they seem to be performing almost the same. We haven't seen them at the larger scale, but what we have seen is that you can also take an already pre-trained model that has been trained in an expensive fashion and replace this self-attention with an RNN component, like a scalable RNN, and then tune it to basically convert one to the other after training. And that means that during inference on the hardware, you have fewer memory requirements. So you can bring the model, for example, to the edge device, like your smartphone, for example. And that many people have been doing. And because there is a race to the bottom with the hyperscalers and the big AI companies, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them actually have implemented some of these techniques. They're just not telling us.
Okay. So is it something that you desire to see as well? I mean, obviously, you're working at present with the Swiss National AI Institute. You're co-leading that from what you've mentioned as well. Like, what's your aim there, and how would that relate to, obviously, your past research, your efforts?
Yeah, so the Swiss National AI Institute is really a more global institute. As part of it, it has the Swiss initiative, and this part of the Swiss initiative is the LLM effort, the large language model fund. It's the biggest foundation model that is being trained as part of the Swiss initiative, and that I'm co-leading. And we are very interested in having these models as efficient as possible, so that when you use this model, you pay the least amount basically per token. And this efficiency is a sort of core research direction of the AI Center as well. And in this context, we are highly interested in these methods. But it's not the only method. There are also other techniques like distillation into smaller models, sparsifying the models where such that not all the weights have to be active at the same time. Sometimes this is called mixture of experts as well, something that's been becoming very popular this year, or also running at lower precision. Often computer science things are 32-bit. Training is standard now in 16-bit. That has been since a few years. And now the Grace Hopper architecture from NVIDIA allows us to train at 8-bit or do inference at 8-bit. And we have also hardware, even specialized hardware, that can do even lower bit computations. And all of these result in making the models more efficient and thus cheaper to run. And that means we can run them more at larger scale, and maybe also more complex processes where the model is not just responding immediately, but has like a loop where it can feed back to itself and give itself feedback and improve iteratively. Those are still a bit expensive right now with the largest models, but those prices will come down very soon.
Is there anything, obviously, in your own efforts in the initiative itself that you would say align with Swiss values rather than any other values that may be present in the training of foundational models? It's a Swiss AI initiative, and that's what
That is
happening
true.
in Switzerland.
We're also saying that we train a Swiss LLM, but we have to be realistic here that we can't just train on Swiss data, so to speak. So we're aiming to train on 15 trillion tokens. It's a number that's not even imaginable, really.
Yeah, that's huge.
So one way of describing it, if we train on documents which are on the web, so they're publicly available for legal reasons, we don't train on data that is acquired illegally. But you can think of it roughly like this. If we train the data that we expect to train on is roughly 18 million books of regular size, like 100 to 150,000 words. So think of it like a regular book, like an average book size. And now imagine that every Swiss person hands you 10 of those separately. That's roughly the data that we train on. So it's a huge amount of data. It's a lot of data from past times as well, from the web, and it's all public data. So we are we have to train on a very multilingual, multicultural data because yes, we want to do a Switzerland, but we also want to have a foundation from which other sovereign and public AI efforts can benefit. So it's really, we're hoping to be a stepping stone for others. So that's one thing. But we do also collect a lot of Swiss data for a sort of post-processing stage, where then we introduce that data later on after this, let's say, very international checkpoint, in order to make the model much more sensible towards the Swiss culture and Swiss context. And this is mainly achieved by training on Swiss data.
And is this with the intention to implement it in certain governmental institutions, organizations? I mean, what is the desire around public accessibility and maybe implementation of the model at the end? Is there a certain direction that's been discussed, or?
Absolutely. So we are a research institution. The initiative, the Swiss National AI Institute, is really a vessel for funding and compute, but it's really led by EPFL and ETH. It's also mainly made up by the two AI centers of these two technical universities. So we don't have any commercial interests for any time. So we are intending of making everything publicly available, share everything to be as transparent as possible and useful for research. But we also intend to share the model weights with license that allows commercial use, such that it can be used in industry. And of course, it's going to be a public model, so we're not going to be hosting it for people. We're not going to provide a subscription service, but we are already talking with partners that could then host the models for us in case that it is useful. And we're already exploring collaborations with institutions and companies in trying to figure out how can these models be used in their particular context. And I believe that every organization that produces a lot of text, moves around a lot of text, and consumes a lot of text, well, it's a generative model. We can't tell you yet what it's going to be useful for, but most likely there will be some process that can benefit from these tools. And we want to talk to you to figure out what that process looks like exactly.
I mean, one of the things that you emphasize in that as well is obviously the sort of requirement it's not a sort of requirement, it is a requirement in a lot of implementation and emphasis around the building of models. It's the need for transparency and trustworthiness in AI development. Sometimes, though, you hear a lot in narratives, especially public narratives, that come from various different geographical locations. And obviously, there's different regulation in different geographical locations with less of an emphasis maybe on transparency. How do you, in particular, balance these priorities also with, the requirement for cutting-edge capabilities?
Well, we are not a startup, so we don't necessarily have to hide the cutting-edge capabilities that we are introducing because they are part of the research that we would do anyway. And in computer science, or in particular AI/machine learning research, this is all publicly available. Almost all of it is in an open platform, so you don't even have to pay. Everyone can read these papers and very often also get access to these models if they decide to upload them, the code on GitHub or the models on Hugging Face. So we care more about being just as compliant as possible. We care about how these models are going to be used. We care about the technology and to democratize AI in general and not leave that capability to a handful of tech companies in the US, basically. And I think many people share that interest as well. And that's where we draw strength from. And it doesn't take much to just one can just look at the European AI Act. It has certain clauses that demand transparency when it comes to general purpose AI models, which by now are basically not met. Now, I'm not a lawyer and I can't really comment on the technical implementation of the EU AI Act, so probably it's not going to be that strict. But if you would be strict, then by summer next year, the existing closed models and open source models wouldn't be compliant and would mean that you wouldn't be allowed to use them in Europe. And Switzerland, as being surrounded and in the heart of Europe, basically can't allow itself to deviate too much from Europe itself because we have Europe as a market as well. So if a Swiss company wants to build something with this, it's important that the models are compliant as much. And that's what we try to aim for. And we have the luxury and research to be that transparent because we don't have IP that we need to protect.
Yeah, do you see that being a sort of problem? Obviously, there is that necessity in the position that you are in, and obviously the position that you represent, the initiative that you're leading, do you see it being a problem with the spread of like geographical emphasis or tilt that could motion towards less of an action around transparency? I mean, if you look at maybe the polarization or the division of less transparent models with more transparent models, do you see that having an impact in any way?
So you mean the cultural differences, for example, within
Cultural
Europe?
differences, and let's say, there's always that race for like speed over quality or speed over transparency. Do you see that having an impact on AI democratization or AI development in general?
Well, I think democratization, not necessarily, and more with respect to companies trying to gather a market and make a profit out of it. There, I think it has a big impact. Public models, just because they are not living at that forefront and trying to make money, and thus also are not able to accumulate a large amount of VC money essentially to build products. They have the disadvantage of being slower and come later. So it's also important to maybe bring a bit of a distinction. So a large language model is really sort of the core component of, let's say, an AI system, if you want to call it that. So ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, those are essentially AI systems. They're combined with other systems. They have safety things in place that don't allow you to generate certain things, for example, because it doesn't fit their ideology. They also have the ability to search the web or other things. The large language model is the core component of that, and it also takes the most compute and the most effort to develop that. But the product in the end is a significant delta that is also introducing a lot of nuances, like what sort of queries do I want to fulfill, or what is the personality that the agent should have? Because the raw LLM doesn't really have a personality. It's an autocomplete model. The personality is something that's being introduced afterwards. And so we hope that by providing a public model that is sort of like a raw diamond, others can take this and fine-tune it for their particular needs. So particular companies, for example, or academic or state institutions. And so it gives others the ability to adapt it to their own needs. And in a way, that is another way of democratizing AI, because now it's not just one central technological company that defines what this would look like, but everyone can make it their own. Although you still need like some compute efforts, it's like massively less. Like it's like several orders of magnitude less money that you need to take into your hands.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose it's one of the benefits as well of the approach that you're taking, that you do hope that, Swiss SMEs and also startups, it can benefit from the practical application of this in AI as well. So that's always something that's given back and allowing a little bit more of a positive impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we've had a very interesting conversation around a variety of different topics, and I'd certainly like to thank you for all of the useful insight that you've provided us with today, both through your research and also the actual application and what you're working and co-leading at the moment. So thank you, Imanol.
Thank you so much for having me, Wilma.
I'd like to thank everyone else who's joined us in this journey today. Please share the episode if you'd enjoyed it, and we look forward to being with you soon.